All right. I think we're live. What's up, people? All right. I'm Sam, and that's Austin. And there's nobody here yet. But as we start talking, we want to introduce ourselves. So we're on our main channel right now, my main channel, Outdoors in Maryland. And me and Austin got together and we started a podcast. And we started a whole new YouTube channel. And if you go to the comments, I pinned it in the comments. So you can go to the comments and hit on it. We're looking for at least 50 subscribers right now. We're about 36 or 38. And once we get up to about 50, then we will go live there every once in a while. Most of the time we're not going to go live. We'll record, but we will definitely be going live every once in a while. But for YouTube, you need at least 50 subscribers in order to go live. So that's what you're going to do. Like I said, we got it. I got it pinned in the comments. If you can go in and go to that channel and subscribe, would be awesome. Today, we were talking about in a couple of days, August 1st, we have the shutdown of the stripers. You're not allowed to target them. You're not allowed to do anything when it comes to stripers. And one of the main reasons is the heat and the mortality and all that stuff. So we're going to bring on Davis Sikorski. First, this is my partner, Austin. He's a guy that makes all the funny jokes with all the trash in Back River, as he's still messes with his phone. What are you looking for there, pal? He's in deep thought.
I can't hear you.
You can't? Go out and come back in. Go out and then come back in. What we'll do is that we'll remove him. I'll bring David on, and then we'll let him come back in once he goes out and then comes back in. What's up, Dave? I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, man.
We did a recording about a month or so ago, and we had a pretty good talk when it comes to blue catfish and all the regulations and oystering and all the good hoopla that comes with that stuff. But with the shutdown coming up with stripers, and I know we were definitely going to talk about menhaden. Mm-hmm. And as I can say is that once we get you start talking, you're going to just have a wealth of knowledge. So I'm thinking that the people that come in and want to check us out and leave some comments for Dave, anything recreational. There's some commercial stuff I'm sure he knows about, but this is mainly going to be for the recreational angler right now. The hot weather really messes with the stripers. Mm-hmm. And let me bring my man back on because I know he's I don't know if he's ready or not. Hold on one second. Nope. We'll let him go out and come back in. So tell us one of the reasons why you really want that they shut it down. I know it's because of the heat, especially because of water temp. We just got off the water. Let me see if my man's in here. Hold on. There you go, Austin.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you at first. I was getting worried.
Well, when you go and do live streaming, it's just the nature of going live that something's bound to go wrong technical. But once we get it all figured out, we'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm likely to have a 3-year-old run in the room here shortly, so
yeah.
It'll happen when it's live.
So I just introduced Davis Sikorski. He is a CCA. Why don't you tell just real quick what CCA is and what's your part in CCA?
Yeah, so it's CCA stands for Coastal Conservation Association. We're a nationwide 501c3 nonprofit, an advocacy organization at our core, a membership organization. So people join the organization, and we have state chapters which are organized up and down the Atlantic coast. So I oversee the Maryland and Virginia chapters, and we're focused on recreational fishing, access to recreational fishing. We have a big habitat enhancement program where we build artificial reefs. Tomorrow I'll be in Federalsburg working with Shore Rivers and some students building reef balls. So the fish, the habitat they live in, all that stuff, we care about it. And we've, as an organization, been involved in shaping policy and making sure that recreational anglers have a voice at the table for nearly 50 years now.
How long are you going to be in Federalsburg? Because I'm only 10 minutes away.
I'll be there. We'll be working with the students from like 10 to 1 tomorrow, mixing concrete, filling the molds. And then the next day we'll be back at it, taking the molds off. They're a fiberglass shell. Mm-hmm. And what you're left with is the concrete reef ball, which will then be put away at storage for a little bit, and then get added into our queue to be placed out at a reef site. These particular ones, because they're being built on the eastern shore, will be stored on the eastern shore and then placed most likely at the what's called the Clint Waters Reef at Cook's Point, just near the airplane wreck in the chop tank.
Okay.
We're always we're trying to get them as close to the people that have made them and enhancing the fisheries, on both sides of the bay and up, anywhere we can.
That's cool. The striper shutdown. Water temp today. We just got off the water a couple hours ago, and it was 82 degrees. In the little cove we weren't too far away from the I don't want to say where we were at, because then we don't give our credit spot away. But explain to them the
You ain't
whole
catching
reason.
nothing anyways.
Hey man, I got 3 dozen today. They're sitting right next. I got a tub of them. We're sitting right next to me right now. But just explain why. But then, is there any reports that it's actually working? It's actually working.
So the shutdown in the summer first came about in the 2020 season, and that was because the coastwide body that manages striped bass, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, it deliberates and oversees the management of the species, so that all the different states participate from Maine to North Carolina. So because striped bass exists in the waters from Maine to North Carolina, the states work together as the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. They develop what's called a stock assessment, which is a big scientific model based on surveys and inputs of information, both from fisheries like recreational and commercial fisheries, but also from what's called a fishery independent survey. So they're going out there and trying to catch fish in their own way, using this, like the same nets in the various ways the biologists try and count the fish. All that input comes into a model that estimates the population and the overall trends of the population. So then managers deliberate over setting different guardrails for the population size. We want it to be a certain size and not fall below a certain level. And the way that you do that is by controlling fishing mortality. So we have all these living critters out there doing their thing, and if people weren't fishing for them, they'd live their lives and die somehow.
Right.
Something's going to eat them. They may die of old age. That's mortality. We call that natural mortality in fisheries management. And the managers try and estimate about what percentage of the population is being lost over time from natural causes. And then they set regulations to limit fishing mortality at a certain level. And so we've seen now 7 years of poor recruitment in striped bass, or observed a lack of young success in the young spawning and becoming bigger fish and repopulating the coastwide stock of striped bass. And so what that's caused is right about 2018, there was a need to reduce fishing mortality. It took a while to go through the process, which the commission does. They either do what's called an amendment or an addendum to the fisheries management plan. Each action is a little bit different in what they're allowed to change. But ultimately, we were making some changes in the 2018-2019 period. And 2018-2019 was the period in the Chesapeake Bay where we had record fresh water. So we were seeing a lot of different things happening. And we also had, of course, hot summer temperatures. And so really concentrated around the Bay Bridge and the upper bay up off of Tolchester. That seemed to be where the real body of stripers were for people. Charter boats, private recreational folks fishing on a lot of these fish. And we started to notice a lot of dead floating fish downstream of where people are fishing. And with the tide, of course, they're moving back and forth. Those fish are what's called a dead discard if they were caught by a recreational angler or a charter boat, which falls in the recreational fishery. And so there began to be more and more conversation of, okay, well, the population's declining, the spawning's not going well. We need to reduce fishing mortality, but we're also seeing these dead fish. And so we don't want a fish to die after somebody lets it go. And so what the department chose to do, what DNR chose to do, which was consistent with the Atlantic States rules, was consider a summertime closure, because ultimately we have these 365 days of the year. Fishing only occurs on, some of them. We typically have a June 1st open and a December close. So out of those really 6 months that Marylanders are out to go and able to go out and catch fish, that's when we're causing fishing mortality. Well, the estimates are based on a certain percentage dying after they're caught and released, which is considered 9% year-long coastwide. So if you
how do they figure that out?
They've done a couple of studies, which was, folks have been critical of because they're maybe not consistent with the way that the fishery operates currently. But there were a handful of studies they did where they had fish that they observed and just did a calculation where they figured out approximately 9% of them are dying post-release. There's been more recent studies which are looking at it in this current time, which is important. We always have to keep up to speed on that. And for the most part, what you're looking at is either the hook hitting the fish in a place where it causes mortality.
Right.
If they're hooked in the gills, they're bleeding pretty heavy. I don't care what the water temps are. I don't care what the temperature is. Those fish are going to be more likely to die.
Right.
And so that's where things like getting rid of a treble hook on a plug is a good tactic for not, having those extra hooks floating around or flying around, around the fish.
Live lining eels. I'm pretty sure that's regulated just for that.
Yeah, deep hooking fish down in their gullets. Like that's why a circle hook's always been required for eels. It was also during this same time period that Maryland first enacted circle hooks, non-offset, so perfectly straight inline circle hooks would be used. And so that's the limit to deep hooking. So you hook a deep fish or hook a fish deep, you hook a fish in the gills and it's bleeding, it's probably going to die. So the 9% piece is more about the probability of a fish being hooked in a way that will cause it to die from a hook wound. You also, a striped bass ideally is within about a 60-degree to 80-degree water temperature. That's about perfect for them. They can handle cooler, they can handle hotter. They ideally are going to have a certain level of salinity in the water. So when there's more fresh water or no salinity at all, we find that the fish have a harder time rejuvenating. And so there's a lot of hook and release mortality in fresh water across all striped bass in reservoirs, elsewhere. So there's those couple little things that we know. It's been observed, it's been studied. And so what DNR was doing, and all the states up and down the Atlantic coast were doing, was saying, okay, how can we shape our regulations differently to limit mortality? DNR had the floating fish challenge, which wasn't necessarily all recreational fishing. There were some pound nets in the area that would lose fish. And of course, watermen don't want to lose those fish either, or, waste them. And so bottom line is there were some dead fish there. There were also the water quality. When you deal with low oxygen, you get the dead zones, you get really hot water, the oxygen molecules in the water are further apart. And so as the water comes across the fish's gills, they can't breathe as well. It's no different than an old person going out in weather like today. It's tougher for them to breathe. And so all those things lead to mortality. But in the end, DNR only has so many tools in the toolbox. They can close days so that we know we can assume that there's no mortality that day from fishing. Yeah, some people still go fishing, but it's a small amount.
Is it, can I ask you something though? Is it something with rockfish? Because I'm a bass fisherman and we're in the same, you're in a lake or something that gets up to 90 degrees and you do the same thing. You don't see that in like largemouth basses or something with striped bass that happens more than maybe a largemouth bass?
I don't think so. I think just the conditions that were existing in the bay, especially at that time, were so fresh, and the lack of oxygen in the freshwater piece was the biggest impact, I think, on post-release mortality. I don't think we would have seen it if we had good salinity. The summertime's obviously been hot for a very long time. I don't know of 2010 or 2005 of reports of these dead fish floating. So I really do think the freshwater component and what all those flows and all the nutrients that come off and all the stuff that comes over Conowingo and down all the tributaries, I think just led to such bad situation in the water where there was a lack of oxygen that the fish would really get squeezed. They call it the dissolved oxygen squeeze. And DNR's put out a lot of information from this period, 18, 19. They've done a lot of studies, a lot of outreach to the public so people can better understand what's happening to them. And it's really just they're stuck in an area where they have enough oxygen, the water's acceptable of temperature, and that just leads to a stressful situation.
Right.
I mean, to answer the question though, Sam, largemouth bass are much more tolerant of low dissolved oxygen, right, and temperature. So you'll absolutely see, in hot areas where there's less dissolved oxygen, you'll see way more striped bass, die or be affected than largemouth.
Well, maybe because the largemouth bass is made for basically fresh water and maybe not with the salt water. Maybe
same with catfish, right? The blue cat, especially catfish. I mean, they're ridiculous. They can, and the snakehead, right? The snakehead can damn near, they can survive apocalypse apparently.
Hey, let me tell you what, I had one of them snakeheads 40 minutes away out of water, came home, and them some bitch was just, and if I got,
Right.
I thought I killed them all, but one was still in there, just going to town in there. And that was about a 45-minute ride.
Yeah.
So David, a question for you. So how, you mentioned the water quality, and then you also before that mentioned the tools within DNR's toolbox to be able to handle it. Is it effectively the case that DNR doesn't seem to have the tools then to be able to handle issues with water quality? And so it's recreational and commercial guys who are kind of going to be on the forefront of having these regulations to try and attempt to save the striped bass populations. It's almost like we're throwing our hands up saying, hey, can't do anything about the water quality, but we cannot fish as much for them.
Yeah, I'd say the water quality, the ability to change water quality is more difficult. It takes much longer. You can do these things on land, which will lessen the amount of flow of nutrients into the bay. And in theory, we're working hard to stop that. But I think it takes a very long time to make the difference. And what fishery managers are doing is managing fishing mortality. So that's why it falls back on impacting the user group that relies on that resource. And if you have less of the resource available, you're going to have to tighten up things. And if you are having a larger impact on them than you see fit, then you got to look to the people that are killing them, the fishing mortality side of things, because we really can't control natural mortality. It would be nice to stop, of course, the continued water quality impacts that are happening every single day, but that just doesn't seem to be something we've observed happen quickly, the improvements.
Yeah.
So in the end, it comes back to controlling that fishing mortality. And it's the same thing with, a species like menhaden, a bait fish. We need to have a large abundance of those fish to feed the ecosystem. And when you don't have them because they didn't swim here, it leads to reduced limits and what's being looked at right now, which are different limit, catch periods and things to happen within the Chesapeake Bay. And so quite often I hear people talk about it like it's, oh, why are we being blamed? Why are we being blamed? And the reality is just the user that takes the animal. That's the only control we have. It's unfortunate.
And it makes people mad,
It
rightfully
does.
So, right? And that they sit back and they go, okay, well, I now I can't fish. Traditionally around here, especially. I mean, we're talking, your granddaddy striped bass fish, your father striped bass fishing, and now you're being told, hey, for 3 months out of the fishing season, effectively, you're either going to be limited on what you can catch or you can't catch anything at all.
Yep.
And I don't blame people being upset. I guess what's important about conversations like these is to direct that anger towards the proper place. And so, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but my estimation, just based on what I see, is that it's the water quality that's doing the majority of the degradation of the species, less of the recreational fishing and commercial fishing of striped bass, more of the just lack of quality of care. And first and foremost on my list, you might not want to get into it, but I would always call it out, is the water treatment plants, which continue to just be just a massive above board polluter of these waterways. And I don't think it's any, I don't think that it's, strange at all that this area, specifically where I'm at, the middle Chesapeake, upper Chesapeake, is seeing the most severe cases of decline for striped bass, because this is also where we get the largest inflow of urban sewage systems.
Right.
And then of course the Susquehanna, right? Which, props to Pennsylvania. We don't talk about this enough, but they've done quite a bit to limit, their flow of nutrient pollution in the bay. And so that's still something that a lot of people, quickly point to is, oh, the Susquehanna's, they're responsible for 90%. It's like, they're not, they've come a long way. And I'd say Maryland has not come, in my, maybe it's just bias, right? But it doesn't feel like Maryland has come quite as far.
Look at right in your backyard. Look at right in your backyard at Back River. I mean, so much money invested, and the stories that you hear about the lack of maintenance and the just failures in that one plant. That's of course getting a majority of the volume that's coming out of the city here, which where I live. And so Yeah, it's a complete and utter failure. I mean, it's unfortunate. Frankly, that's what drove me to get more involved in advocacy, gosh, 15, 18 years ago, 20 years ago, was seeing these failures and saying, okay, well, I can be mad, but I can also just show up. And that's the reality of what we're left with, is having to show up and try and push for these changes. But you don't have to look very far to see a failure in government at all levels. And for some reason, it seems like they're not very accountable to those failures. There's always a reason. And that's the unfortunate reality of what has led to these water quality situations that depress the ability for the species to thrive, and therefore depress the economic benefit that comes from all that. And it's really just a tragedy. You know, the thing
So
that
DNR can't serve a warrant on the Back River wastewater treatment plant. Although, they can serve a warrant on a guy who, is suspected of overfishing or running an illegal trap of some sort. But they can't serve a warrant on the Back River wastewater treatment facility. And so that's probably where the majority of people's frustrations are. Is hey, we know who's causing this, and it ain't me catching my 2-fish limit. It's unfortunate.
No, it really is.
How are you fishing at?
Well, and the reality of DNR is they're there to manage the resource in its prevailing condition. You know, we can guess what it's going to be in the future, but they look backwards sort of and go, okay, well, this is what we think are here, and therefore we think we're going to control fishing mortality in a certain way by setting up certain regulations. And for the first time ever, we closed a period of the summer in 2000, and then it moved around a little bit. It was in early July, then late July, and now it's in August. And the reset that happened over the last year or so to make it change to this point where August is closed, there's no perfect spot to close it. And in fact, if we wanted to just take care of the rockfish resource, we could just close the whole summer. But obviously, there's a major impact on that, on those that rely on it. And there's a lot of, I think, really oversimplification of what happened, who's involved, what their intentions are that happens in this striped bass fishery, both in Maryland across the recreational fishery, the charter component of it, the commercial fishery. You get a lot of finger pointing and a lot of nonsense. But that's the reality, is we still have poor water quality. We still have a fish that's not having success spawning. And that's because of the environmental conditions which exist in the spawning reaches, which aren't really necessarily human driven per se. I mean, there is degradation of these rivers over time. You want me to stop and get Austin back in?
Yeah, I'm looking at him. He's backstage. He's already come back in.
Gotcha.
Oh, he went back out. So isn't there a closure in April? Is it April that's closed? Is that because of spawning?
So there was, historically, there's always been a closure for targeting of striped bass in all the tributaries starting in March. And so it's March and April, and then partway into May, they open up a section of the rivers, May 1st to May 16th. May 16th, it was always traditionally May 16th, the mouths of the rivers opened, and then June 1st, everything opened. So that's been in place since the 80s, the closure of the spawning reaches. In 2020, there was kind of mix and match of who gets what. That's when there was a 1-fish limit put upon private anglers, a 2-fish limit if you went fishing on a charter boat. Right. And at that time, there was a very minor reduction in the commercial quota. The overall goal was to reduce fishing mortality by 18%, or reduce the removals of fish the following year by 18%. And you do that by changing the regs. And so that was in 2020. And that was one of the first times in my experience where DNR chose to change the limits for different groups. Typically, if the way it should be done to lower fishing mortality is a lowering tide lowers all boats, and a rising tide should lift all boats. But there was a lot of discussion around the importance of, the economic impact, whose fault it was, who's causing this. A lot of the whose fault of it is all the politics of it, which I think are unfortunate at times, because you lose sight of understanding that you have a degraded water quality that we should all be working on together. We have a problem with a lack of striped bass spawning, and the Chesapeake Bay produces approximately 80% of the entire coastwide population. And Maryland is the king. I mean, we have the most rivers that produce the most striped bass when the conditions align. They just haven't aligned in 7 years. This has happened before. It happened in the 70s and 80s. That led to the moratorium, a 5-year closure in Maryland that the other states didn't do. The other states closed for a year at most, up and down the Atlantic. So all eyes are on Maryland. So frankly, that just intensifies the conversation here with DNR and the groups. So
you mentioned that 80% number. That's been a widely accepted. 80 to 90% of all striped bass use this as a breeding estuary.
Yeah.
I'm starting to wonder because and you believe everything you see on social media, right? But I'm starting to see, I see a lot of striped bass catches happening more up in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts. I'm seeing a lot of things online about just record amounts of runs of stripers, and I'm wondering if these warmer, what are just clearly warmer years, and we don't have to talk about why, warmer years after warmer years, and we know that they have this strict kind of temperature gradient they can hang out in. I'm wondering if we're not seeing a structural change in where they're going to breed now, and maybe this decline that we're seeing is possibly as a result of them just, I mean, me and Sam had talked about it before, they just might not be coming up here as much as they were.
Well, and it's, so if you think about the population, so think about from Cape Hatteras up to Canada, that's the traditional range of striped bass. They're highly migratory. They winter off the south end, they summer up north. A lot of that's following bunker, following the menhaden schools. They have their available food. Of course, they eat all sorts of things. They love little lobsters, and they eat crab in the bay. They eat all sorts of stuff, right? So if you just think about it as the number of fish spread out across the entire coast, yes, we have seen a shift in lots of different species to the north, where like their center point of their biomass, their center of mass, really, if you think about it, is further north. Black sea bass all of a sudden just exploded all over New England, and we didn't know what to do. Some other species have shifted north. Atlantic herring have shifted out of American waters, and now the menhaden are up in the Gulf of Maine like they haven't seen in 30, 40 plus years.
Yeah, so it wasn't just social media rumors. It's true.
No.
Yeah.
And it's not the first time, but I don't know that we know. I haven't seen where they've compared what we understand about 50, 60, 70 years ago and today. There's no question that I feel like it's happening maybe more quickly, and just these patterns are different. And if we zoom back home just to the bay, well, let me talk coastwide first. So we have the Roanoke and Albemarle Sound population of striped bass, which are genetically separate than the Chesapeake. And so they were fueling the North Carolina. Yeah, maybe they overlapped, came into the Chesapeake a little bit, but that was a different biomass there. And we saw that collapse first. And it's pretty much gone. There's striped bass throughout these rivers in North Carolina, but not at the level that they used to see. There's a major hatchery program, and they're finding that most of the fish being caught by people in these certain concentrated areas are hatchery fish or of those genetics. And so they've really seen that collapse. I think tons of anglers remember heading down to the bridge tunnel, the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, it was just like lights out, all the way through 2010. You'd have eeling in the winters. I've been down there catching monsters on a fly rod, fishing against the light line of the CBBT. Everybody getting in trouble for fishing out off past the 3 mile line. That was happening in the like 06, 08, 10 period, something like that. So you had that biomass of fish. Well, now what you're seeing in New York, New Jersey, you're seeing them winter up there. And so they're what we call the Hudson bite. So like the mouth of the Hudson, the northern stretches of the Jersey Shore, that's where we're seeing a more biomass, but we're not seeing that density elsewhere along the line. So you're seeing less fish trying to cover that whole area. We've seen the collapse in North Carolina. You've seen this onward march of the population of the big spawners. Are they returning here? I think they are. I think they are still returning here. We're seeing anecdotally, people are catching a lot of fish in the wintertime, a lot of nice big ones. The nice big ones correlate well with when they were born. They were a strong year class back in the day. I can't remember the date right now, but you get these nice shots and these nice bodies of fish which are born because the conditions lined up, and then enough of them survive. So all of a sudden we have a lot of big ones. Well, in the peak of the fishery, we had a good age structure. So we had big ones, we had medium ones, we had little ones. And that gives you a lot more recreational and commercial fishing opportunities, but it also kind of gives you a lot more tools in the toolbox to change the rules a little bit and still have fish available. Now what we're seeing is just a complete lack of fish for fishermen in the bay. That's a product of them not being born. I think the spawn was attempted. I know the spawn was attempted. I've never seen any evidence that would say that striped bass aren't coming back into the Chesapeake to stage and then spawn in our rivers. It's that the water conditions and the environmental conditions, whether it's temperature, whether it's availability of food, water flows, they need a certain amount of flow. They need a certain range of river in order to survive. We've also never seen a situation, we've never been able to observe until recently, where you have a fish like a blue catfish directly overlapping with striped bass spawning grounds. We've seen blue catfish with straight bass roe eggs in their stomach, fertilized eggs, larvae. We've seen blue cat.
They
We know.
do. So you mean catfish do have striper eggs in their stomach?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
So I guess we don't. I'm sorry. I mess with Noah. I know they're getting ready to do a big study with all that. I'm like, hey, we know what it is.
Yeah.
Don't ruin their study.
Well, I mean, blue catfish eat everything, right? So they're eating bass, they're eating white perch, and that's another unique thing going on right now. We have a lack of white perch. I think they're being eaten in the juvenile larval stages when they're little guys, but they're also not being born because Morone americana is the white perch and Morone saxatilis is the straight bass. They're relatives.
I'm a Dundalk guy. Explain that again.
What's that?
Explain that again. I'm from Dundalk.
Oh, it's their. I
don't understand that word. That's
what I'm
their
saying.
technical name. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's their scientific name. Scientific.
There you
so
go.
Morone saxatilis is rockfish,
Okay.
and saxatilis actually means of or around rocks.
Right.
So for Marylanders to call the straight bass a rockfish, it makes a whole lot of sense, right? They live around oyster rocks, jetties, etc. But we're not the only to observe that. Morone americana is the white perch, and so they're relatives. And so, like he's saying, struggling to catch white perch. I was out there last week taking some kids fishing. I was out there today, didn't catch a white perch. Thankfully they're a more fast living species, so a nice big white perch is 4 or 5 years old at most. Unfortunately, a straight bass before it gets to spawning age has to be 7 or 8 years old. And so it takes longer to dig you out of the hole when you're dealing with a longer lived species. But in theory, that longer lived species only needs spawning success every so often to sustain itself as an animal. Unfortunately, we want them to be at the highest levels of abundance so everybody can benefit from them, and that's just not happening right now. So there's no doubt that it's all the little pieces of the puzzle. It is the prevailing weather patterns. It is the ocean cycle that we're in right now. They call it multi-decadal oscillation of ocean currents. It's these 30, 40-year cycles. Croaker are on a big cycle. They're back right now. They're coming back, it seems. I caught one today.
Never had them. Never ate them. Are they good? Are they good?
Yeah,
meat?
Yeah. Now, see, if you talk to my dad, native-born Marylander, been eating out of the bay for 70 plus years, he'd tell you that croaker and white perch don't taste as good as they used to, and it's partly because of what's going into our waters. Our waters
crabs taste good. Crabs taste great with all that poop in them.
And what's that cycle? What that cycle that you were just talking about?
Multi-decadal oscillation of ocean currents.
Okay. And what's the effect of that? What are we seeing?
It's sort of. I'd ask people to Google it because I'm going to get it wrong. But it's essentially what are the current patterns? What are the weather patterns that lead to the prevailing environment that we have? We've seen, people talk a lot about climate change and that storms are going to get worse and more frequent, those types of things. So it's those patterns that start to unfold. I would probably say it best compares to like an El Nino or La Nina type situation, but it's a longer period. And so they've observed that there are these certain conditions which exist, which are good for some animals and bad for others. You have to remember that, straight bass, white perch, eels, or not eels, they're an oddball, herring, shad, these fish that run up rivers are going to thrive when they have the right amount of flow and the right water conditions. If you enter into a drought period like we've had the last couple of years and mild winters, you're not going to have the right flow in the spring, which presents the right conditions for all them to have success in spawning. And so you're just going to start off with less population of those creatures. So what you also see sometimes, I think it was probably 10 years ago, seeing absolutely everywhere these little baby grouper in aquaculture cages, people catching them rod and reel, mostly lower bay, Virginia stuff. And where'd those fish come from? They got pushed in by a current and the prevailing conditions were okay. Did they make it out? I don't know. But I think we're going to see more and more of that happening. It also speaks to why menhaden have really disappeared and moved north. And you're seeing that biomass of menhaden up there. I'm not sure exactly why. I'm not sure anybody knows why, but we observe it, know it's the reality, and therefore have to make changes related to it.
What about some of the other larger predatory species, mainly in the lower base, like bluefish and cobia? I'm thinking of how are they faring?
So bluefish have had a little up and down. From a management perspective, they're relatively stable right now, but you're not seeing the abundance. I know folks aren't seeing like the medium size, fish. They're pretty common in the mid bay in Maryland. I've seen, it seems like a little bit bigger class of bluefish. And in the past, like the moratorium, there were bluefish everywhere, massive bluefish in the bay. And there has been that same, there's certain species, when you see certain species are down, other species are up. So I would expect bluefish to do better right now. They're spawning at sea, and their young ones find an estuary by riding those ocean currents and going to those places that they're programmed to go. I caught a bluefish in the Severn River today, this big. So he's a little guy.
Severn.
Yeah. I hope there's a bunch of them to help fill this void. Just like I've said, croaker, hardhead, they're on their way back, and we're starting to see more of them. The last time I remember catching a lot of them was about 2005, maybe. They were
sea bass too.
Sea bass too, right? Yeah, and sea bass, they've moved north. They've had a mixed kind of experience in the Mid-Atlantic, especially as it relates to fishing. There were some major impacts on catchability of sea bass and where they are when all the wind survey work was being done. So these super sonars were going out and blasting the bottom, blasting the water column to figure out what they could do. Could they put a windmill out there? And Captain Monty Hawkins from the Morning Star wrote about this endlessly and did a lot of field work, I would call it. He'd be out fishing on a reef, catching sea bass. He told one story one time where the sonar boat's working, and you're marking fish on the meter, you're catching fish, and all of a sudden the sonar boat comes in. The fish stop biting, but you still see them. And he said at one point the sonar boat went into the wind, a helicopter landed on it, and while the helicopter was landing and the boat had stopped its track, all of a sudden the bite started again. So he actually radioed to the boat operator and said, "Hey, did you turn off your sonar for a minute there when that helicopter was landing?" And the captain confirmed it. So that's not necessarily a big population-wide impact necessarily, but we did see this, I think, disruption of the fish in their natural situation. We observed it as anglers, not the catchability, the lack of catchability with sea bass. Captain Monty has also talked about, and I think he's right on this. He had experience way back in the day putting on his own limit for the first time on his boat. And he believes that because they're a fish that lives around a reef, they actually change sex. And so they'll turn from female to male in order to be able to populate the reef. And the more abundance of fish you have, the less likely they're going to switch and be pushed to spawn. And so through management changes, we've continually gone after a bigger and bigger fish to limit fishing mortality. And he would argue, after decades of fishing these fish and on these reefs, that you're better off fishing them at a smaller level to thin out the population on that reef, because it forces them to spawn. And when it forces them to spawn, you end up with a bigger population writ large, and they can spread out across all the available habitat. So I think sea bass, definitely part of what we saw, we've seen a dip in abundance. I mean, they're coast-wide, they're at a 280% or something like that of what our goal is for population, but we're not seeing the densities that we want. So the bottom line is, when it really comes down to it, a fish can be born, a fish can die, a fish can leave an area or come into an area. And that's what managers are trying to estimate, is at what rate and how do we control all this stuff. Some of it is driven by the law and what the law requires managers to do. And on the federal level, like a fish like sea bass, which are managed on a federal and state level cooperatively, the federal rules take the lead, and we have to follow a federal fisheries law, which is called Magnuson-Stevens Act. Built into that law are these strict timelines for rebuilding a population to a certain level, and that often causes conflict with fishing, because what they're guessing will work in the experience of guys like Captain Monty isn't going to work. And it's like beating your head into the wall, waiting for things to work out where the population does swing back. And so there's a lot of complexity. What I'm saying may not make a lot of sense, but anyway, bottom line is it's normal.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I mean, you're basically you're like a two-man fire team trying to put out a 30-store 5-alarm fire. I mean, it's kind of I feel your pain, man. I'm, out there trying to pick up the trash that I'm trying to do. And it feels, never ending. And it feels under, like essentially you're not bringing enough to the table to really do much, but try to take care of that little thing you can that day. Yeah. So essentially a unwinnable task. And people are going to be upset at the only tool you have, which is to curtail and regulate how people catch.
Yep.
It's like it's literally the only tool you got.
It is.
Yeah.
And Mother Nature can make us look great or make us look terrible. And
yeah, next year they could bounce back and everyone's like, thank God for Dave and CCA making those recommendations.
right.
or
the opposite.
they don't.
Yes. And a lot of people also have like, for what can we control and what can I control? Like, I'm unique. I sit on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. I actually sit at the table, can raise my hand, speak, make a motion, do all this stuff to shape the rules. I get a lot of heat for it. But the average person, all they can do is show up, and most people don't. And so what are they going to do? They're going to sit back on their keyboard. They're going to complain. And unfortunately, that's not going to make a difference. Maybe it feels good in the moment, but it may make their algorithm or their post go further. But the reality is it's not helpful. Showing up and trying to figure out at least how to represent people, represent an interest you may have or a group you may have, I think is the best thing people can do, no matter what their opinion is, because at least that's where the difference is being made. That'd be an army of people coming out to help you pick up trash. At least they'd be making a difference there. So that's all I can say to people is get involved in the process and learn about it. There's an absolute ton of information on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission website. And so if anybody wants to read it, the good history of striped bass, that's where it is. A lot of other species as well that are important to us all. Lots of charts, lots of figures, lots of pictures, things that can help you understand what these trends are. And that's it. It's all a trend that we're trying.
There also seems to be I think because of the reaction to, we're being punished for this when we know the real culprits. There's also then that turns into a bit of a distrust for the data you're using to come to those conclusions. So I've seen that. Obviously, you see that anecdotally online. You got a lot of commercial guys that have accounts now, and thank Luke for that. I don't think there's no way you'd have this many commercial guys. That's just cool because you get to see their opinion, and they're out there in the field. So it's really, they're a good bellwether as to what's really going on. But sometimes what they say, what's really going on, conflicts with the data that you guys are saying you see, which is bringing you to these conclusions. And I don't move too far off the striped bass conversation, but I think we've well covered it also. But the blue crab population, which by the data shows a continued drop below the mean of what the population we want it to be, and yet the actual crabbers are saying things are booming. And they're saying they're only, at this point, their only constraint is the state saying they can't catch more, which is what's kind of, in their eyes, artificially inflating the price right now.
Yeah. And it's difficult to sit back and watch some of that. We're not heavily involved in crab management. I always joke around. I'm actually allergic to crabs, which is an absolute curse. Yeah, I joke around. I say I'm allergic to crabs and crab policy. They eat each other. I mean, that's the mortality of crab is a crab. In fact, speaking of Luke, he did a great podcast with Steve Ranella I listened to last week and went through a lot of like how it impacts crabbing. I learned a lot and it was great.
That was good. There he is. Oh, he disappeared. Real quick as we talk about that, that's another reason why we have this podcast is to bring guys on like you and anybody else that my man, there he is again.
My grandma has called me twice now. Grandma, I'm on a podcast.
That's all right. We give grandma
the X, man. Come on.
But that's why we have
the future of the Chesapeake here, Grandma.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, so in the comments, I linked me and Austin's other channel. I came here on my channel because I have a little bit more of a little bit more people. So we were hoping to come live maybe once or twice on this channel just to get you over to the other one. The other one is the Outdoors of Maryland podcast. That's me and Austin. We are partners in this all the way through. And we talked this. We've had David on before. Now, at the beginning of this, we were having, just like you going in and out, man. I couldn't believe all the little technical issues we were having. But if you go over and you hit the link in that I got pinned and go over and to subscribe, we're looking for at least, we're about 38 subscribers. We've only been doing this maybe a month or two, working out all the technical stuff, and which we're starting to do. But if you go over there and come over there, we're going to do most of our stuff on that channel. Here we might do it once or twice. Next week real quick, we have Dylan Waters from the Water's Edge. He's a YouTuber. I think he works in the fishing industry too. I think he said he goes around surveys. We're going to have him on. We're going to talk because
Catches
he's
monster
definitely,
stripers.
yeah, he's a striped bass fanatic, and he loves chasing them, and he seems like a really cool young man. We're going to have him on next week. I haven't decided if we're going to do one more live stream. I will talk to Austin about that, but we want you to go over and subscribe to the other channel. The link is pinned to the top of the comments. Go over there, subscribe. We can get 50 subscribers. We'll start going on that channel and start building the best podcast here in Maryland. All
Do
right.
we have any more time left today, or are we wrapping it up?
Yeah. No, I'm not wrapping up. We got to let people know that are in here and out of here I'm going to do that a couple times. That's just to let people know to get over to the other channel.
That's probably smart.
I didn't know how to join the chat. There's a button for it, but I just put in our private chat a link to the Atlantic States website. You can maybe put in the chat for people to check out if you're looking for help. If you need help falling asleep tonight, just pull out one of those like 200-page PDFs and start looking for the pictures.
You'll have to send that to me because
I got a question. So one other thing, we were, so this is the ongoing battle between the snakehead invasion, right? Which is you got.
Wait! You have to call it Chesapeake China now.
Chesapeake China, yeah. So you got
who came up with that name? I don't know.
So China Argus. Hold on, back we were talking scientific names of straight bass and white perch. Well, Chana Argus is the name of
it's the scientific name. Yeah, it's a beautiful name. No, but the fight is effectively you got people like me and you me and you, we're fishermen too. So it's not, but we're not just environmentalists and conservationists and, but it's people like me and you who believe that the presence of a invasive species that can effectively it's effectively a better killer than the striped bass, right? It does everything it can't do. Survive in shallower water, warmer water, more brackish water, less oxygen. It does it all, right? And it probably kills more, quite frankly. I would take a guess, probably kills more on average than striped bass do because it's got such a wide range. You got guys who fish for them who love them. And I love that they love them, but they love them so much that they put them back. And actually they get violent about it. Like if you say y'all shouldn't do that, they're ready to go to war. Right. So listen, I'm not even making a claim here about whether you should or shouldn't. I'm just going to ask the question, is the exploding snakehead population possibly, and also blue catfish, are these invasive species possibly somewhat displacing the striped bass population anyway?
I think that especially blue catfish, I think they're more broadly distributed and they're in an environment where these striped bass are going to exist. I think the snakehead have less of an impact on an animal like a striped bass. Maybe they have a little more impact on white perch, but I think their biggest impact is going to be on some of the species that maybe recreational anglers don't care about because they're other pieces of the ecosystem, the minnows and the smaller fish like that. So time tells, and so in fisheries, we set these goals, we set targets, and we set thresholds. And I say all the time, in everyday life, it's all relative because everything is relative to something, especially when you're doing a scientific comparison, right? You have to relate it to what you want. And so there's no question that the snakehead are having an impact. There's no question the blue cats are having an impact. I think some people want to measure that exactly and pretend that we can say exactly this is it. Well, it changes every day. And so what is that level? I don't know. And do we need to measure it? I don't know. We see the result. We see what it looks like to have snakeheads in these waterways for 20 plus years now.
It's been at least over 20. Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody's going to make their own conclusion. And, the guys that say, oh, we need to make, snakehead a game fish. We need to manage snakehead. Well, heck, if you want to manage snakehead, we might see the precipitous decline of their population because some of the other species we're managing are heading that direction. That's kind of a joke, but
they're trying to stop. They're trying to stop bow fishing, and the guys that absolutely love the snakeheads. They're trying. They want to stop bow fishing, and I think what they don't like about the bow fishing stuff is that some guys are pretty.
They want to conserve it. Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying? There was,
Oh, yeah,
wow.
Bow
There's
fishing.
people who want to maintain a population of snakeheads for the benefit that they provide, because they do provide a economic benefit, and people
Oh,
are
yeah.
excited about them. And I get it, but I also push back at those people and say, well, that's selfish. The goal here is to try and maintain this Chesapeake Bay ecosystem in somewhat of its historical state. We all talk about trying to get back to another time period, whether it be through
Right.
oyster population or water quality or these things. Well, first, that's not going to happen. We got to take a step back and go, what's realistic? Could we ever decimate the snakehead population? Many people
think so now.
and
I
they
don't
haven't
think
done a
so.
very good job. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know guys that bow hunt for them. I've done it. I fish for them.
Mhm.
I'm one of those guys that'll do it any which way you can and make my own personal decision around whether I keep it or kill it. And in the end, that's what it comes down to. DNR is never going to say you absolutely must kill this thing. Like, you can't
Right.
mandate murder. It's just not happening, right? And not that killing a fish is murder. It's totally different than
Which I was surprised about, honestly, until someone worded it the way you just did.
Yeah.
I assumed DNR's rule was you catch it, you kill it.
At first it was.
That's their goal. That's actually that was their goal. They always suggested it. They never required it. It never said anywhere in regulation or law that you must kill this animal. What you cannot do is transport it alive.
Right.
Which makes sense. When you said it the way you said it and other people said it like that, like, you can't make somebody kill something. Like, yeah, okay, that's kind of stupid.
Yeah. And the selfish part of it, I know people have done it, is the old 5-gallon bucket snakehead migration. I mean, pick up a fry ball and move it. And I hate to say it because people will do it, but it's kind of the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, they've done it.
That's why they've moved. And I get it. Like, people are selfish. They go, oh, well, I want them in my pond, or I want them in my creek. I want to be able to fish for them. It's unfortunately, it's wrong. And that is illegal. And people should be penalized for it, because it leads us to where we are today. And hey, maybe I'll be laying on my deathbed and think, oh gosh, thank God the snakehead showed up. But for me, they're an opportunity. Take advantage of them, get out there. But I also encourage people, like, the chirping on the internet, man. I mean, I think it just drives some people's days to argue with each other. It's sad. And the anger and the frustration and like the low blows that I see some people exchange. I'm just like, don't you have better?
I've tried so hard to I got to realize when it all comes down, to, you can have all the money in the world, you can be the nicest, evilest, doesn't matter. At the end, you're gone and you can't take it with you. So why be such a total asshole now? You know what I mean? Just, I don't agree with a lot of stuff, but I don't know. I think I got my own way. I know a certain way I believe, but I think I'm pretty tolerant when somebody else is wrong.
Yeah.
What's crazy is apparently they just started in a noticeable way showing up around New Jersey and New York, which I assumed because of how long they've been here, and I would assume they're all up and down the East Coast, but apparently we had to somehow.
They were tired of coming down here fishing for them.
Yeah,
it was pretty much in one area. There was like, screw this, we're taking home with us. That was probably
crazy.
before. Yeah, that's all it is.
No question. And I mean, heck, there's no part of this bay, there's no part of this watershed that's the way it used to be, 150, 100 years ago, and it's going to continue to be like that. Humans have an impact, whether it's failing to manage a government budget, failing to rebuild a bridge, failing to maintain stormwater plants. I mean, look around, it's everywhere, and that's the unfortunate reality. So I encourage people, don't fight with each other, take a step into the arena, come to the meetings, get informed. And there's nothing like, you don't have to show up at a meeting to have an opinion, right? Like, everybody there's always going to be freedom of speech, I hope. But my point is, you're going to be more effective if you're going to take the time to show up, or at least become informed, read the information, and all the stuff on ASMFC's website, whether you like it or not, it is the information we use. Like you were talking earlier about data, and I want to hit on that real quick because that's really important. And there's been a major push in commercial fisheries criticizing recreational fisheries because of the recreational fisheries data collection system. And the reality is, commercial fishing and recreational fishing are two wildly different activities, different drivers, different benefits, totally different. The only thing that connects us is the fish and then the management structure. And so coastwide, all the fisheries that are migratory, that are in our coastal state waters and our federal waters, are all managed by a data collection system that the feds do, which is called MRIP, the Marine Recreational Information Program. It's people with a clipboard that might meet you at a public dock somewhere and ask you, what'd you catch? Or what were you fishing for? What did you catch? How many did you throw back? How many, how big were they? That type of information is one source of data that goes into the management system. It's generally understanding the whole management system as a whole to try and get back to the point of managing fishing mortality. You're trying to understand what somebody's catch amount is per a unit of effort. So it's catch per unit of effort. So it's how much are you catching based on how much time you spend on the water. Mm-hmm. And in the recreational data set in MRIP, which is just a survey, and the difference on the commercial side is this census. Every fish is caught, fish are tagged, reports are filed, not all on time, not all accurate. That's a whole other matter, but it's a census. They're trying to count every single thing so that they know. Recreational, it's a survey. They're trying to get a statistically valid sample of people, and then they're making assumptions, and they're like, all right, well, I interviewed Dave today. He caught 2 fish, 2 striped bass. We can assume based on how many people we have fishing, approximately how much effort they made, and then how much fish they caught, so we can understand catch per unit of effort. The problem is when you overestimate recreational catch and effort, which I think we've been doing for quite some time, you actually overestimate the overall population of the fish, at least a fishery like the striped bass. If we're guessing that we're having a certain level of success as anglers, well, then the assumption is, well, there's got to be X amount more fish out there, or these people wouldn't be this successful. And that's been a major focal point. In fact, it's what led to some of the changes in 2018, 2019, 2020. There was a recalibration of MRIP where it actually expanded our belief of the population. It scaled up the population, scaled up the number of anglers, scaled up the number of trips and the amount of fish they're catching. Well, it was wrong. I can flat out say I've looked on the back end of all that data. It is so wrong, and it's scaled it up to a level where we're making false assumptions around how many fish are out there. Well, 2020, private anglers went to 2 fish to 1 fish. Charters got to keep their 2 fish if they signed up for the special program. Commercial had there were no reduction in landings in 2020, even though they were supposed to catch 1.8% less fish. Because DNR said, oh, this is a recreational problem. Recreational is causing this problem. We got to leave commercial out of it. Well, what ended up happening was you scaled up the size of the recreational fishery that said it's recreational fishing's the problem. Something like 90% of overall mortality of striped bass is from recreational fisheries. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't lower quota, especially when you're talking about coastwide fish versus commercial fisheries that happen in specific areas. Mm-hmm. So the Chesapeake Bay has 80% of the commercial catch in numbers of fish comes out of the Chesapeake Bay. We have 2 to 4s, 5 to 8s, and 8 pluses. A big portion of our population is going to be smaller fish, so they're 2 to 4 pound range. So you're going to get a higher volume of smaller fish, and that against the quota, up against the max poundage. So if you catch all 2 pound fish, it's a lot more numbers of fish to catch 1 million pounds than if they were all 10 pound fish, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think Maryland DNR made a big mistake by not reducing commercial quota, because I know there's an impact, no question about it. I'm not talking about that. I mean, just the impact on the population. I think we were killing at too fast of a rate, and then we fell right into this situation with no good spawning. So our last good year class was 2018. 2018 fish become legal in about 2021. They're big enough. Well, we needed that body of fish to last a lot longer to keep fishing good and hopefully repopulate, but we kept whacking them. We didn't reduce the quota until I think 2024. It may have been earlier, but finally the quota was cut. At that time, the commission was supposed to cut fishing mortality by 14%, and they chose to only cut it by 7%. So nothing against the commercial guy. I feel for him, but the population needed us to kill less fish no matter who's killing them. And we were being led astray by, I think, this incorrect data. So there's been a major focus for decades really on how can we improve these data sets. The Gulf states have done a tremendous job in improving their data systems where they work with anglers. People trust each other now. They report their catch, and it's a lot better because those states took the initiative to work with their anglers and make it happen. I've been saying it for 20 years. DNR, why don't we do a better job of this? I've been getting people to log catch on a smartphone using all the fishing tournaments we run. I've been pushing. And then finally in the 2022 legislative session, I worked with some partners and some legislators to craft legislation, which created the Recreational Fisheries Data Task Force. So that's something the legislature loves to do. We created a little task force. We impaneled a bunch of people. We came up with a plan. We wrote a report. We delivered it back to the legislature in late 2022, like we were supposed to, as well as DNR. And then we're sitting here, kind of fiddling our thumbs, waiting
no
for
legislation.
Well, there hasn't been a major change. Now, DNR does now have the ability to require reporting of anybody they issue a license to. So they can bring in more robust data systems, and they are planning towards that. Many people, especially commercial fishermen, say, well, we tag our fish, they should too. Well, that makes sense. If we counted every single fish and tagged every single fish, it would get us at least on par, from a management structure perspective. Would it get us better data? Maybe. But statistics are valid, and statistics are a way you can manage these massive things like a fishery up and down the Atlantic coast. We can do a better job with the model we have. We just have to get back to square one with our data. Unfortunately, there's this thing where you can't just like flip a light switch and go, okay, new data set, we're going to use it now, because you have this statistical model. And so you have to get a new survey system in place, run them in parallel, test the model to figure out that it even tells you something remotely acceptable for management. Because we're not just pulling stuff out of the thin air. It has to really be consistent with what we think to be reality. So there is going to be always that disconnect between what you see on the water and what you think managers understand. Far too few people actually connect with managers and have good conversations. So people need to do that. We took the initiative to write the REC data report and had, 20 different stakeholders participate. And I'm hopeful that DNR in the future here will be implementing better systems to capture information from rec anglers. What's worked in the other states is just apps. There are fisheries where you have to report your catch, like blue line tilefish, bluefin tuna, some others that are kind of creeping their way into recreational fisheries to make it more of a census. But it's just not realistic. I think at the peak, the coastwide striped bass fishery had something like 9 million participants in the striped bass fishery. So just the cost alone, the database alone, the computers to crunch that kind of data, we just don't have that capacity. And if we wanted to get it, we couldn't afford it. It doesn't make sense.
It's important though that you're, saying and willing to say that data that was being used then might have been incorrect, right? Might have led to a conclusion that wasn't really backed by sound statistics. And because people will pick up on that, if you feel like as a recreational guy, you just, got the hammer put down on you and you're watching commercial guys still haul in, that's the type of thing that does breed distrust. And so when nobody then comes behind and says, hey, you were right, that was bad data, that was a bad decision.
Well, in that case, that decision was fueled by politics. You can choose to look at the data and go, oh, well, this is the reason why, ooh, this versus that, ooh. And a bureaucrat loves nothing more than get us fighting at each other, especially the political level. And I said straight to the Secretary of DNR in a private meeting, I said, in fact, we were having dinner in Easton. I said, this type of thing, picking winners and losers, which I get it, they do it every day. But picking winners and losers like this is going to push more people to want to impact and close commercial fisheries. Because you gave them a get out of jail free card when the entire rest of the fishery is being impacted. And unfortunately, it's just the way political leadership tries to do things, continues to do things. And the more and more people I think that are involved in the system saying no, a rising tide should lift all ships and an ebb tide should lower them all. I even would welcome some flexibility if it was more of a transparent conversation with multiple stakeholders. I'm a big fan of trying to find consensus on these things, because I think every well-meaning recreational angler could sit down and look at all the information and say, actually, it's okay for those commercial guys to get a pass this time. If it's not going to continue to, unfortunately, put us in a deeper hole population-wise. It's not against commercial fishing. I mean, heck, I would love nothing more than every fish I eat to come from a supermarket, and every day I go fishing, I catch fish and throw them back. It's
our charter boats, are those considered recreational or commercial?
No. Maryland's not sure. We like to switch back and forth. We're a little bipolar on that. So
because they're mad because they got pretty ticked off when they got cut down to one. You got to figure these guys are you know, I heard them saying, well, now who's going to come up here and spend the money they were spending to catch
Right.
one fish when they used to have two, and then now that it hurts them, it hurts. They go back to the dock, and there's a restaurant there, the marinas and stuff. So it just trickles down to everybody that makes their money this time of the year for the stripers, even though wintertime's good too. But you know, it just trickles down to the owner, the restaurant owner that, you know, that brings people, takes their rockfish and cleans them, whatever, and cooks them for them. But it's just, I don't know, it's a big impact on everybody.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And that's a big part of what led to one fish versus two fish and commercial not being reduced. So charter fisheries are a recreational fishery. That said, they are a commercial license. They are a for-profit enterprise. They're called for hire. You know, you can hire them to take you fishing. The way I look at it is I can buy fish from a commercial fisherman. I can hire a charter boat. I can be a private angler. In the end, I want to see those things regulated at the same time, at the same scale, at the same level. The traditional, you know, meat fleet guys that want to get out there and have the two fish per person, so it's a nice meal. It's worth a couple $100. Let's just say there were no regulations. If the striped bass population continues to dwindle, those businesses are going to be impacted, and that's the harsh reality. I mean, there's management and regulations only affect the natural world so much. We talked about that a lot. Like Mother Nature in the end is the one that's impacting it. Yes, they can find the enemy in me. They can find the enemy in DNR to blame during this time period, but it's the loudest voices I've found in the for hire fishery. And there's about 600 licenses of people that, you know, have the ability to take people fishing. A certain percentage of them fall into a big boat category. There's more small boats now than ever. I talked to a lot of them, and everybody's hurting. I mean, the fishing is not as good as it was. It's sad that a Kent Island charter boat has to run from Kent Island up to Baltimore Harbor to catch their now one fish and then figure out something else to do and then turn around and come back. That was never the case. There are fleets up and down the Chesapeake Bay because there used to be an abundance of fish out in front. There's a lot of people saying, oh, well, the fish are only there because the dolphins chased them or the food or whatever it is. That's all relevant. And there's definitely a reason why striped bass only exist in certain spots right now. But a big part of it is there's a lack of population. And I watched, in my personal experience, fishing a ton, watching that body of fish move north. They were at the hill outside of Eastern Bay for a couple of years, and then they'd move their way up to the Bay Bridge and then up to Tolchester, and now they're up in the harbor. And it is a dwindling number of fish. It's also things that drive them to be there, whether it's food, temperature, oxygen, hiding from predators. Yes, all those pieces of the equation matter. In the end, there's a whole lot of less striped bass. And even some of the loudest voices that would criticize me online, criticize me to my face, I hear what they say to other people behind the scenes. And people are admitting now that there is a lack of fish, and they're diversifying their businesses, which they have to do. And
there's plenty of blue catfish out there. I mean, you're not going to get, you know, it's not like going through. It's not you're people come here to catch the Maryland striped bass, but I mean, they're going to diversify. I mean, you can go out and still have a good day catching plenty of blue cats. They're good to eat, and you know, everybody's got to kind of find their way out. You know what I mean? They're going to have to work it out somehow, and it sucks because my next was commercial crabbing last week, and she's pissed off. Come August, she gets put on a 4-bushel limit. Her bills are the same. The gas prices are the same. Everything's the same for her, but they say you're only allowed to bring in 4 bushel of crabs. And so, you know what I mean? So it kind of, and that's for is that for the rest of the year? I can't remember if that's for the rest of the year or just August.
Like I said, I'm allergic to crabs and crab policy.
Okay.
So therefore regulations. I'm not up to speed on it.
I'd imagine for the rest of the year. I mean, August is close to.
Yeah, but they got September, October. You could crab till December, but most likely around Halloween in the rivers and stuff like that, pretty much they start working their way out. Once the water really starts getting cold down in the 50s and stuff like that, them crabs start moving out. And that's where the potters still could catch them, but the trout liners, they're pretty much done for the most part around Halloween. And but I can't see them that whole time. I thought it was just for a month. I guess it's all the way. It sucks. I mean, it really kind of sucks to tell her that, you know, she knows she can catch maybe 6 to 8 bushels. I think the other day she caught 10. You know, I mean, I was with her and we caught 6. And I'm thinking now you're going to tell her, well, now she can only catch 4 bushels of males.
Yeah.
You know what I didn't know? Well, I'm sorry. You know what I didn't know and didn't realize is that a commercial guy can catch females, and the size doesn't matter. If they're a mature female,
Right.
they're a mature female. There's no size limit.
Yeah, I
So
think
it
I
is-
learned that listening to Luke the other day.
Huh?
I said I think I learned that listening to Luke. He was talking about how they attach and breed once, and then they can put off eggs after that. And yeah,
I learned that last year.
Yeah, and a lot of times what you're allowed to catch is what's available to you. Like the males are all in the upper bay, and I think they overwintered in the upper bay from what I'm hearing with the drought. They were further up, overwintered, and so some of the guys on the northern part of the bay, the western side, seemed to do better initially. I talked to folks that were down in Smith Island, and there's just no crabbing, no catching. There's a lack of crab pots out in the bay right now in the deeper water. And so we're seeing these cycles that are impacting people, and it's tough because Maryland keeps getting, the commercial fisheries keep getting hit by these cycles. And we talked about oysters last time. There's a catch limit on them per day. And it's, it impacts the ability of somebody that's a hard worker that's set up to make that body of money. Now the boom's been lowered on them. And so it's happening. Striped bass, crabs, oysters, you name it. Blue catfish are cool. They're fun to catch. They're great to eat. They don't belong here, but they're not a replacement for any of this stuff. And that's the biggest dilemma that our state is facing. And it's very difficult. And again, DNR doesn't have a lot of choices. In the past, there were ways, like during the straight bass moratorium, there were ways that the state would invest and pay people for work. It's not the best necessarily, but it's something. But we're going to see this continued decline in the number of people that can make a living in commercial fishing, especially now with inflation. And the same thing's happening in the recreational fisheries. There's captains moving. There's captains that, and the whole month of April was closed up until this year. It was closed for 6 years, or at least 5. There were light tackle captains that would have been taking fishing in the main stem of the bay, just like Maryland always has in April. Pre-trophy season, catching and releasing fish, they were shut down. They weren't allowed to fish in April so that the commercial quota didn't have to get reduced and that the charter boat could keep 2. These guys all started going down to Cape Charles, renting houses. There's 20, 30 captains that are Marylanders that should be driving Maryland economy, driving Virginia economy. And so no matter which way you look at it, this is why there's often enemies, boat sector to sector. But it's like, gosh, I wish there was a way that some leadership across the board would start to come together and say, guys, look, yes, we're competing over a finite resource, but we really need to start thinking longer term and thinking about what are the most important things that we can work together on. Yes, water quality is one of them. Does that quickly move the needle? No. What can quickly move the needle is what I try and focus on the most. And again, not to downplay the water quality and the complete failure of all these folks that we entrust to protect our waterways.
Yeah.
So,
I do. Well, the fix to the sewage problem, I think probably you're right, is going to take some time. But I do think the moment you stop leaking as much raw sewage, you'll see a pretty immediate. I mean, in your area where you were on the Severn, I think there was something close to like a 16,000 gallon sewage leak in Cypress Creek in June. I mean, so we're talking just consistently, whether it's Baltimore infrastructure or the surrounding area of Baltimore infrastructure, whether it's the treatment plants themselves, consistently just millions of gallons of bullshit just running into the water. If we were just able to fix that, forget planning salve, forget the oyster projects and the fisheries and hatcheries. If we froze all that and just stopped the sewage overflows, I think that would cause a pretty immediate. But you're right. Where is the? I don't know anybody by name, right? But I do know that we have a Maryland Environmental Service and we have a Maryland Environmental Department. I don't know if we have a Secretary of the Environment. We do. Great. Yeah. So fantastic. So like where's the person who comes out and says, Maryland, these are the problems. You know them. We know them. I'm going to work to fix them. Because I've yet to see that. All I ever hear when it comes to government agencies who talk about the Bay is effectively, we're on the way up. Look at the last report card. We were at a D and now we're at a C. And it's always this glad handing, happy time. Hey, we've come so far. And they like to point to the oyster bouncing back, the population of the oyster. They like to point to submerged aquatic vegetation having bounced back here or there. They love to point to the dead zone, maybe minimizing in its capacity. And so, next year, maybe it was only 10% or 12% instead of 15% dead zone. And so we love to talk about the wins. And of course, they never talk about anything that they did to create the win, because they did nothing, right? But it's all pretty much weather dependent, right? Rain less. Oh, go shit, no favor. Like we have a smaller dead zone. But the idea that we have a dead zone at all, the idea that there's areas in the Chesapeake Bay that are devoid of life because they have such little dissolved oxygen. I mean, that is a state that we just should not at all allow to exist.
Yep.
The idea that the harbor is getting pistachio tides in the middle of freaking July, which is something that shouldn't happen at all, right? Yep. But at least August would make you feel a little better about it. Like, hey, this is, and maybe going into turnover and it's hotter. And so, okay, you can make some excuses for yourself. But, these are things that you're right. The lack of leadership is it's so sad because so many people care about it. You would think even just fake leadership, like someone could win an election just on, hey, I really want to tackle this problem. Even just they faked it, and didn't do anything. It's incredible.
They're all pretty good at that.
Most of them might be faking it. They'll say anything to get in there. That's what Wes Moore did. He told a waterman that he would be working with them, and I heard that he really has.
I mean, but it could be a real hey, my list of top 3 priorities. I mean, this could be a real winning message across the board. I mean, Republican, Democrat, everybody would support such a movement. I'm just astonished that nobody has picked up on that. And if you're telling me, well, there's too many competing interests with money, there's too many corporate interests with money, there's we still want to continue to push out development. We still want to, we still want to take in all this money that we're getting for the your water utility bills and whatnot. We don't want to have to admit that money's then going towards a broken system. So we're just going to keep things as usual, and we'll take the wins, and we'll champion the wins. And so far it seems to be something that nobody really, besides people like me and you and your average man, really care about. And so I've seen
talking about the money. I've been extremely frustrated for about 20 years now, sitting through meetings with DNR when the excuse is always we don't have a budget, and it's a valid excuse. But you see the fees increase, and in fact, a bunch of fees were increased on commercial fishers, commercial licenses, so both charter boats and regular commercial. In fact, DNR had saved away some money. It was something like $1.8 million that got swept back in to balance a budget somewhere else. It got taken from DNR and put somewhere else. I remember talking to somebody, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, what are you, out of your minds? And it's 1.8 million is like a joke compared to our budget. And it's all a joke, frankly. And this idea that we don't have money. That said, there is a real reality when it comes to moving the needle in like the effluent problem with our wastewater treatment plants. I've always been told by people that I know and trust that are not a part of the problem in my mind. They're people that are fighting on the front lines, that you spend it, you have this affordable improvements which are being made. We're taking the money we have and making certain improvements, but to get to that last level of improvement in treating it to the point that we would all love to know it's treated to, it's just exponentially more cost and almost impossible to achieve, is the way it's been described to me. I may not be explaining it perfectly, but it seems like we collectively, the state has been trying to make, and I'm not the state, but the state has been making investments. I know that there are investments in incentivizing people to upgrade septic systems, which are a major issue in waterfront properties, especially in the Annapolis area. And so these little tiny things are happening, but then it takes one swing of nature or one major leak or consistent leaks to completely lose everybody's faith in this idea that we are making progress and that you are doing your job. And then on the flip side, like you said earlier, Mother Nature's a real, providing us with these conditions, which even if if it was dry and there wasn't a lot of leaking, let's just say we sealed up all the sewer plants and they were all perfectly fine, and then weren't, they were putting out perfectly clean water, which I don't think they can do, but they were. We still may have a lack of striped bass. We may have a problem with crabs, and we may have problems with all these other animals, because it just takes more than our life cycle and more than our little period of being engaged in this stuff to really see the change happen. That's one thing I figured out over time, is you really have to set your mind to going, okay, the work I'm doing now is for my kids and maybe their kids.
Right.
And maybe enough pressure, we end up in a situation where our culture finally throws their trash away, where the streets of Baltimore are torn apart to fix our system, which was revolutionary evidently when they put it in, but it's a failure and it's leaking all over the place. I don't know. I mean, I'm generally I try and live on the bright side of the moon, try and be optimistic and think that we can make a difference. I mean, tomorrow I'll be building reef balls. I'm going to have Sam come out and meet up with me. We're making a difference, at least in the young people, to realize, hey, I built something. That thing I built is going to provide life and maybe recreational opportunity as we put it out into the waterway. And so that's where I try and focus on it, because otherwise you can get lost in this stuff and just want to go back to your regular life, maybe move, maybe disappear from this place, because it is disappointing. It is still an amazing place. It's unlike anywhere else. And I hope that we will start to see things turn the tide a little bit and see at least a good striped bass spawn and menhaden returning to the area, those types of things happening. In fact, I do want to mention menhaden. So for folks that are interested in hearing this now, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission is meeting next week. I'll be in most of the meetings. I serve on nearly all the boards. I do not serve on the menhaden board. Allison Colton, the director of Chesapeake Bay Foundation's Maryland office, serves on that board and has done a ton of work. I mean, rolling up her sleeves to fight on behalf of Marylanders, to push for what's called an addendum, which is out and being considered by the board. And what this addendum would do is the board would say, okay, we bless this to go out to public comment. We're hoping that happens next Thursday when the menhaden meeting happens. What that addendum is a complex document, but it explains that the board wants to hear the public's input on some time and area closures and different ways to manage what's being taken out of the lower Chesapeake Bay by the industrial fishery omega protein. It is talked about all the time in recreational circles. I've even seen now more recently commercial fishermen being critical of that large fishery that goes and encircles the big school, sucks them up, puts them in the boat, can take 51,000 metric tons of menhaden. That's about 125 million pounds of a fish that weighs about a half pound. So 250 million individual fish being taken out of the system. Those are jobs. Those are commercial fishermen, but they're also, the spillover effect is that Maryland's pound netters aren't catching menhaden.
60 to 70% by one company. And, it's a, for those of us who care about, being American, it's a Canadian company. So that money, that their profit is going right back to Canada. So I'm with you on that, and I'm hoping some sort of headway can come. I know that was, I think, about to go to public comment a couple months ago, and they scrapped it to look more into it. And so this is now coming back. Okay.
Next time, I expect them to release it to public comment. And the reality is, as I've said a couple times, you're managing the prevailing conditions that exist. And part of the information people will hear next week is there's a correlation between a decrease in bait catch, like pound netters or other small menhaden catchers in the bay. When regular commercial guy catching menhaden is down, Omega's catch is down too. And that's because there's a lack of menhaden in the system. When there's a lack of menhaden in the system, we need to have safeguards in place that we don't take as many, because the ecosystem, the cobia, the red drum, the ospreys, the eagles, the striped bass, dolphins, and everything else, dolphins, you name it, have to have their food. So as managers, we should be sitting here, the entire management system, in a forage-based fish, a food fish like a menhaden that feeds other more important and more valuable fish to way more people, should be protected at all cost. You can't, it's like, you have to feed the ecosystem. A menhaden turns sunlight into whale food. I mean, it literally grazes on algae, turns into this amazingly little, protein snack that feeds bluefin tuna, whales, all these critters that are very important, are managed and protected for one reason or another, or utilized by other people. And so the idea that in this day and age that we have a company that can still take 250 million little fish, 51,000 metric tons, grind them up into meal, ship them all over the world. It is a Canadian company. They raise salmon in Canada using Chesapeake Bay fish food.
Yeah.
So it should be feeding striped bass to feed American families and economies and everyone else around here is being shipped up there so that you can find salmon all over the place.
And I mean, you mentioned the menhaden and them eating primarily algae.
They filter.
And guess what we're having a huge problem with in the
Algae.
Chesapeake Bay. Algae.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So every little piece does matter. And I hope that the public comes out on this one. We'll be pushing it at CCA, and I hope to see people across the board, no matter what group you're part of, what you do for a living, show up and get involved, because it's unacceptable. We need to prioritize certain activities, certain people in certain ways. It's not easy, but it's pretty simple that an international industrial company should not be sucking up that volume of food. The management system, ASMFC, has decreased the cap in the Chesapeake Bay over time. One previous number I remember is like 108,000 metric tons versus the 51 that it is now. But more recently, when they reduced it to 51, it was based on, I think, a 5-year average of catch by the industrial fishery. Mm-hmm. So they just looked at their recent history and they're like, oh, we can lower the boom a little bit because we need to be more conservative. But then a whole other thing, talking about data you don't trust in science, that's wrong. In a recent stock assessment, they were wrong. They were assuming the wrong natural mortality. And they assumed natural mortality is, I think the way that was, is that they assumed natural mortality was way too high. And so it kind of limited the real impact of what fishing mortality looked like. Because you compared one to the other and it was like, oh, we can actually kill more fish, or whatever it was doing. It was an incorrect analysis of natural mortality, which allowed them to actually increase the total allowable catch up and down the coast of menhaden in a time when, in reality, now we know what we know now. There's been a precipitous decline in menhaden abundance over the last 5 years, but we, the managers, increased the quota. It was totally ridiculous. So now we're working, we've stacked the deck against ourselves to try and make another reduction. And we have another situation where, because there are a lack of menhaden here, the boats out of Reedville, Virginia, are sailing down the bay and sailing up the Atlantic coast and fishing off of New York in federal waters, because every single state but Virginia does not allow them to operate within 3 miles of the shore where the state waters are. They're operating in federal waters right off the beach amongst bluefish, bluefins, striped bass, all the people fishing for these important game fish. They're going up there, circling the net, catching them up and running south. And I'm even hearing that they're not even catching many. Well, lobster fishermen in Maine have menhaden everywhere, and they catch their quota so quickly because their quota has been based on like the last 20, 30 years, their allocation. And so it's like where the fish are, they're not allowed to catch them. Where the fish were, the guys are running up to where the fish are. And none of it makes any sense, because the Chesapeake Bay needs to be protected is the bottom line. And in times when there's less menhaden, you need to lower the limits, because what's there is important, and you just can't waste it. And I think we're wasting it at this point, selling it off as fish meal.
Yeah. Wow. Hey guys, in the comments, the link all the way at the top of the comments, I linked my and Austin's podcast channel. We're on my channel to get people over there. We've had some pretty cool guests. We've actually had Tommy Robinson's been in here. We've actually had his son-in-law on here. He just congratulations, just had a baby girl. I don't know, baby girl, baby boy, but I know Miggs is a country singer. We've had him on. Unfortunately, it was some technical difficulties, but he is going to come back on. We're going to let him play with his little baby for a little while. We're going to be bringing him back on. So we talk about Chesapeake Bay. It can be a little political. It can be just having fun. It's going to be all about Chesapeake Bay, Maryland, just because of the stuff that we love when it comes to pollution, when it comes to the regulations. And we appreciate when Dave comes on here. We got Dylan Waters coming on from the YouTube channel Water's Edge. He's coming on next week with us to hang out. I haven't decided yet, or me and Austin hasn't talked about if we're going to go live or not. If we do, that will probably be Thursday or Friday next week. Haven't decided yet, but we want you to go and hit the link in the comments. Go over to our podcast channel. Please subscribe. If we can get 50 subscribers, we'll start going live there instead of coming over here. We're just trying to get people over to that channel. And Dave has twice come with us with no problem to help us do that. And we definitely appreciate you coming out, man.
Much appreciated. Yeah.
I'm clicking the link myself here if I'm not a subscriber already. And Tommy, I do not believe there's been an attempt to farm raise menhaden. I'm not sure it's possible. Menhaden spawn at sea. It's kind of a mystery. Spawn out there at sea and the currents pull the fish in here. I was talking about multi-decadal oscillation of the ocean earlier. That is what is driving the menhaden larval distribution up and down the Atlantic coast and why they're not here versus somewhere else. We've seen this before. We'll probably see it again. And my point is we have to manage based on what we're seeing, not, you know, these other forces that are at play here. So I just
it's hard to recreate, to recreationally recreate fish that are coming out of the sea, right? I mean, these conditions are not easily recreated, and that's why you notice such a difference between salmon and, you know, farm raised salmon and wild caught salmon. It's night and day, right? I mean, it's
absolutely,
yeah. So
quality wise. Actually,
what's kind of funny. I'm sorry, Dave.
Yeah.
What's kind of funny is that we're having such a problem because our state fish is striped bass. But if you go up to California, where all the salmon and everything are at, they're having issues with too many striped bass. They're trying to get rid of the striped bass over there in California.
Same thing up in the Maritimes in Canada. They're having Atlantic striped bass impact Atlantic salmon and other important species. You know, Atlantic salmon's almost gone. And so from a hatchery perspective, Maryland did have a striped bass hatchery, but unfortunately, it's generally understood that we cannot afford to, as a state, as a country, to produce as many striped bass as a good spawn could produce. Yeah. And 2018 was our last good spawn. We're kind of riding that wave. You can see, looking all around, there's not many of them there. Some really good captains, some good fishermen, commercial fishermen are catching them and are the first ones to say, oh, there's plenty of them out there. I don't know if that's the case. We see plenty of other evidence that it's not the case for striped bass. But in the end, I think from a hatchery perspective, I'd love to see some fish being put in the water, knowing that it would at least enhance the local opportunity, potentially support some jobs and getting the work done. I don't think it is possible, and it will not replace what Mother Nature can replace in a massive open system like the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic.
I would say they do that. I mean, because they do it with trout, they'll do it with bass, where they'll hatchery and put them in the ponds and lakes, stuff like that. I don't know if it'll be that kind of impact in the Chesapeake Bay as big as it is.
I gotta call my grandma back here, so I gotta hop.
Yeah, we gotta get.
All right. Well, everybody, whoever stopped by, we appreciate it. Make sure you hit the link. Go and subscribe to the podcast. It's Outdoors in Maryland podcast with me and Austin. And again, man, it's been a terrific discussion. And since we really didn't get into, we're going to probably ask you another couple times to come on to hang out because we enjoy it. I enjoy the knowledge. You're you're kind of fun to hang out with. If you want to text me tomorrow, let me know what time you're going to be there. I know it's supposed to rain. Get a little rest and then call me up, and then I'll come down there. I'll film it. I'll put it on the channel.
Heck yeah, man. I think it's I know I'm starting at 10:30, and I'll text you the information when we get off here. So thanks guys
for coming. Thank you, man. It's wealth of knowledge. It's much appreciated.
You guys too. Thanks for doing what you do. The people have got to get out there and talk about these things and learn, and we got to learn from each other and try and work together. It's not easy, but we got to start somewhere.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Hey guys, I'll talk to you. All right, Austin, I'll see you, buddy.
All right, brother.